Thanks, Jonathan. That's beautiful. Well, hi, everyone. Let me change my view so that I can see folks. Welcome. This is the final Metamorphosis talk of the semester. Metamorphosis is a series that has kind of seen a resurrection this semester. Devashish has brought it back, where 2 or 3 times during the course of the semester we'll bring on people that we think are of interest. Jonathan is going to introduce our speaker in just a moment, but I wanted to thank you all for coming, and also be on the lookout for a few things on the horizon. Our EWP podcast, which is now being hosted by a separate site. Jonathan, will you be sending out information on that? Continue to send out information to the students about that?
Yeah,
wonderful.
Sure will.
And also the upcoming EWP symposium, which is going to be taking place on, I don't have the date in front of me, Jonathan.
21st May, 9 until 5.
Right, and this is also being brought back after a few years on hiatus, where students will be given the opportunity to present their own research. Wonderful. So anyway, thank you all for coming. And without further ado, I'll give this over to Jonathan so that he can introduce our speaker, Glenn.
Great, thanks, Stefan. It's my pleasure to introduce Glenn Aparicio Parry, who is a PhD of East-West psychology, actually, and is also teaching a class in the fall for us. So his bio says Glenn Aparicio Parry, of Basque, Aragon Spanish, and Jewish descent, is the two-time Nautilus Award-winning author of Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again, and Original Thinking, a radical revisioning of time, humanity, and nature, and is currently working on Original Love, the third book in the trilogy. The founder and past president of the Seed Institute, Glenn is the president of the think tank Circle for Original Thinking, which you can find at www.originalthinking.us, and is the host of the Circle for Original Thinking podcast. And I will just add that we will be having him on the East-West Psychology podcast, and we'll be recording that over the summer. So that'll be nice cross podcasts with you, Glenn. So Glenn organized and participated in the groundbreaking Language of Spirit conferences from 1999 to 2011 that brought together Native and Western scientists in dialogue, moderated by Leroy Little Bear. He regularly moderates dialogues for the Institute of Noetic Sciences, of which he is a member. He is also an avid outdoorsman who enjoys hiking and fly fishing. He lives in a fairly remote area in northern New Mexico amid wild horses and other wildlife with his wife, Tomoko, dog, Momo, and cat, Cappuccino. Well, without further ado, the floor is yours, Glenn. It's a pleasure to have you here. Look forward to the talk.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for the beautiful music to start us off. Thank you, Debashish and Keika, if she is here. Oh, I think she is. Thank you for the auspicious meeting we had together on Thanksgiving Day at our mutual friend Jeff Mishlev's home in Albuquerque. That has brought us to this moment in time. And I'm already saying thank you, which could be a prayer, because that's the shortest prayer you could ever say is thank you, and that's fine. But I want to continue with a little bit more prayer. And that's for a lot of reasons. Beloved Creator, thank you for the blessing of being gathered here today. Thank you for the ancestors that made this moment possible. Thank you to Haridas and Bina Chaudhary. Thank you, Haridas and Bina, and thank you to Sri Aurobindo. Thank you for that spirit of the Institute, the California Institute of Integral Studies, which I was blessed to visit in a dream even before I came there, to the living room of Haridas and Bina Chaudhary's at 21st and Dolores Street a long time ago. And thank you for Ralph Metzner. Thank you for Angeles Arian, some of the great teachers that were there that are now with the ancestors too soon. Thank you for them. Thank you. Thank you. There are some dear ancestors. Thank you, Grandfather Leon Secretero, Grandfather Leon Secretero, Grandfather Dan Moonhawk Alford, Grandfather Dan Moonhawk Alford, who was a teacher at CIIS, who changed my life. Thank you, Moonhawk. Thank you, Tobasanak Canoe. Thank you, Tobasanak Canoe. Thank you, Paula Gunn Allen. Thank you, Paula Gunn Allen. Thank you, Patricia Clark Smith. Thank you. Thank you to all the ancestors of each and every one of you that brought us to this moment in time. And thank you for the ancestors of the grasses, the flowers, the trees, the bees, because we wouldn't be there, we wouldn't be here without them. And the ancestors of the mushrooms, the mycelium network, the fungi, all the plant kingdoms. Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us to this moment. Thank you to all the elements, the light, the air, the water, the earth, the starlight, the light in my solar plexus, the light of the central fire, the light that penetrates all things in my consciousness, the breathing aware air, the prana, the pneuma, the ruach. Thank you for the air. Thank you for the waters everywhere, the waters in the clouds, under the earth, in the rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans, and the water in our hearts that connect to the heartbeat of nature. Thank you for the waters of life. Thank you, waters. And thank you, Pachamama, Mother Earth, that we're born from, that we return to. Thank you for all the critters in the earth. Thank you for the earthworms named after her mother. Thank you for the earthworms that have no eyes, but they can see, have no ears, but they can hear. Thank you for the earthworms for being in touch with Mother Earth's vibrations. And thank you for all the living microorganisms in the soil. Thank you for the bacteria. Thank you for the viruses. Thank you for germs. Germs germinate. Germs are life. Thank you for the whole of life. Thank you for all the critters that are blessed and nurtured and held in Mother Earth's arms. Thank you. Where we live now in New Mexico, I want to thank the horses. We're so blessed, as Jonathan mentioned, to be living among wild horses. Thank you for your spirit that comes to us every day. Thank you for your spirit coming into dreams. Thank you for your strength and your gentleness. Thank you, and thank you for the coyotes, they may be known as tricksters, but thank you for the coyotes that need to shake us up a little bit, to wake us up. Sometimes, thank you for your call. Thank you for the bear. Learn so much from you, bear, especially in the winter. We welcome you back now. Thank you, the bear, the fox, the bobcat. Thank you for all the critters that are here, including mountain lions that are here nearby. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the winged ones, the soaring ones, the eagles and hawks that give us vision, and the finches that sing to us so beautifully in the morning. Thank you. And the hummingbirds that flap their wings so rapidly because they are special messengers from another realm. Meet, they're called in one Carrie's language here. And thank you for the hummingbird. Thank you for the blessings you give. And thank you for all these critters. Thank you so much. Today we're gathered in a very difficult time in the world, at least for human beings. This is a time of war. This is a time of war where nuclear power is engaged. This is a time when the United States and a lot of Europe is engaged in providing weaponry. This is a very dangerous time. It's also a time of rise of authoritarianism. It's been a time of political polarization. It's been a difficult time in this country, a difficult time to discern truth. But we ask that in this forum, Creator, we ask that the right words be said. We ask that a sacred space be created, that we create a coherent dialogue, that in what we do here today, we contribute to wholeness, we contribute to blessing. and that we are blessed, and that everybody that is here in attendance is blessed, and that California Institute of Integral Studies is blessed, and the East-West Psychology Program is blessed. Thank you so much for having me here today. So, aho, mitakeyasu. Thank you. So, I want to begin with prayer, not just because I love to begin with prayer, but because the title of this talk is Original Thinking. And when I wrote the book, Original Thinking, my concept really was to look for the origin of thought. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that the origin of the very word thinking is thanking in 7 languages that I came across, and I bet a great deal more. So in English, French, Dutch, German, Norse, Frisian, and Anglo-Saxon, the origin of the word thinking is thanking. Now, why would that be? Why would that be? I found that to be such a delicious mystery. And when I meditated upon it, and I can't say that this is the correct answer or anything, but it seems to me what felt right in my solar plexus is that originally all our thoughts were prayers. Originally, all our thoughts were ways to connect with Creator, to connect with the whole, to connect with the great mystery. So the talk tonight is really about, how did we get from that place where all our thoughts were prayers, where we were living in a state of blessing and wholeness, to a state where we seem to be, many of us today, in a state of war or separation. Even our thoughts sometimes separate us from other people. They trap us in our own shell. So how do we get back to gratitude? How do we get back to that feeling of blessing and wholeness? So for myself also, my own journey into this question of original thought was greatly stimulated by the dialogues that originally were begun in 1992 when Leroy Littlebear and David Peat approached David Bohm, turned out to be in the last year of David Bohm's life, and initiated a dialogue, a meeting of the minds between quantum physicists and I would say native scientists. So, the word science just means to know. But sometimes I say native elders, but they were scientists, and they were sharing different ways of knowing. And out of that original dialogue, they came to a lot of areas of commonality. And it was the natives who were building a bridge to the scientists mostly. It was a beautiful dialogue, and Dan Moonhook Alford was blessed to be a part of it. His mentor, Sagesh Youngblood Henderson, was the one who invited him. And the linguists act as kind of almost the intermediaries between the languages. And then Moonhawk, who was my teacher in CIIS in 1983, taught a class called Anthropological Linguistics. And Moonhawk liked to describe himself as standing at the lonely intersection of quantum physics, Native America, consciousness, and language. It wasn't an intersection or a confluence that many people equally hung out in all the rivers that flowed together, but Moonhawk did. So that was a very pivotal class, and I became lifelong friends with Moonhawk. And I invited him when I started SEED. I invited him to teach in New Mexico. And then we were just sitting out on the back porch one day, and he was smoking his pipe as he did. And he has this pipe dream where he says to me, what about if we bring the dialogues to Albuquerque and Seed sponsors them? And I said, that would be great. And we set out to try to write a grant, and we didn't get a grant right away. And then we attracted a private party that was willing to partially fund it. And we also decided to bring in an audience, so that since it's a principle of quantum physics that the observer affects the observed. So we did those things. And at that very first dialogue, Leroy Little Bear asks the question, is it possible to have an original thought? And this very interesting thing happened when he asked that question, which is that nearly all the Western people in the room, including my dear friend Moonhawk, tried to think of something that had never been said before or done before. Moonhawk was thinking about what if the Queen saw the castle burning on television? That's probably never happened before. And then she uttered some sentence about that. Other people struggled mightily to try to think of something that had never been said before or done before. But all the indigenous people in the room took the question completely differently. They took the question as an invitation to connect to origin as a place. And that, maybe not at that exact moment, but shortly after that dialogue, that's when it hit me that this is the root of the divide between indigenous and Western consciousness. The West has replaced place with time, has replaced place with time. So, and CIS has one of the most brilliant mathematical cosmologists in the world, probably, Brian Swim. And he was also a great storyteller and wrote a fantastic book with Thomas Berry about the story of the universe. But that's a really riveting story. But there's something about that story that I want to point out. And that's Western cosmology is not at all concerned with where it happened. They're only concerned with when. So we talk about the cosmos being created 13.8 billion years ago, or something like that. There's some wonderful poems by Carlos Castaneda in the beginning of the Active Side of Infinity book, which Dan Moonhook Alford read to us before. But it talks about how the two different worldviews are actually two different syntaxes. So we'll look at that again. So that the way that we look at the world is reflected in our language. It's not that the language creates that, but there's a reciprocal relationship between language, thought, and reality, which is the title of a terrific book by Benjamin Whorf. And so it's really different for indigenous people. So if you ask a Hopi elder about the origin of the universe, they will take you to the confluence of the Little Colorado and the Big Colorado River, which is in the Grand Canyon area. And it's there where the Sipapu exists, the emergence point where they feel they came up from the third world to the fourth world. And that is very different. It's very different than a theory of a Big Bang theory. And I have to tell you a little story because it's true that in 2004, when we had the language of spirit, we called it the language of spirit dialogues. We started them in 1999. and we continued them all the way through 2011. In 2004, we actually, the theme was the stories of the universe. We did invite Brian Swim, he was there. Not for the entire dialogue, unfortunately, but he was there. Joe Subiando was there, who was then the president of CIIS and also a linguist, so good person to, he presented a paper on Benjamin Whorf. And Paula Gunn Allen was there, a dear friend. Paula Gunn Allen from Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. She was a longtime resident of Mendocino, where her daughter lives today. So she was from California, really, but she was a huge figure in Native American literature. And Paula Gunn Allen, we were talking about the origin of the universe, and Paula Gunn Allen said something like this. She said, where I come from, God is a woman. So I can't deal with this Big Bang Theory. I think the Big Bang Theory is a male mock-up. It's cosmic orgasm. Kaboom! Wow, it's great. But it just couldn't be the beginning of anything. It just couldn't. Because what man, having had one, wouldn't go back for more? That's what she said. Now, and I think besides having a great sense of humor, she made a very pivotal point. So it's really, it could be presumptuous of us to think of any beginning of the cosmos. And my experience with Native people would be that almost universally, they would look at this very differently. I mean, what grandfather Leon Secatero said to me is that the universe didn't begin, it was always here. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me. But it's a very different kind of worldview. It's a worldview of blessing and wholeness. So it's there, it's already here. It's a blessing. But it's hard sometimes, particularly when we're speaking the English language, to not revert to tense, to not think of everything as having a beginning and everything as having a middle and everything as having an end. So I think that has something to do with a lot of things. Okay, now, I think I advertised that we were going to deal with a lot of concepts here in a short time. Devaluation of place in favor of time, we've already addressed. The movement from local to abstract knowledge. I could have said a devaluation of the feminine, because that's part of what is going on here. It's all related. The seed of colonization, social and ecological injustice, political polarization. Some of this we'll speak about, but I want to dive into a little bit more into a Western worldview, and to do that, I am going to do, for the next 15, 20 minutes, maybe I'll be doing a PowerPoint, and then we'll turn that off and we'll come back and I'll have some closing remarks from the heart. So let's see what we can do this. And okay, all right. This is what I would call a pre-perspective viewpoint. It happens to be a drawing from Florence that was done about 1350, circa 1350. And notice something about this, and it's very immersive experience. It's a very immersive experience. You can feel like you're in the city of Florence. You can see around corners. You know, it's a very, very different thing that emerged later after perspective. But all right, and this is when Brunelleschi we might say invented linear perspective, but I doubt he invented it. The Renaissance was a movement that looked backward to go forward. And a lot of the Renaissance thinkers studied the ancients, and Brunelleschi did as well. And so it could have been that he was bringing back linear perspective into consciousness that was used before, but it certainly hadn't been used for a very long time. And we know, we can pinpoint the date almost. It's 1415, some people say 1420, where he conducts this experiment by poking a hole into his canvas and putting a mirror behind it. And his intent is to paint the world as God saw the world. Very wonderful intent. The thing is, it probably wouldn't have changed the world that much, but what happens is 15, 20 years later, another cat came by named Alberti, and he creates a how-to book for how to do linear perspective for artists. And that particular book, I don't recall the title, but that particular book was translated into 5 European languages. So it essentially went viral for its time. And all of a sudden, everybody starts doing paintings in linear perspective. And here's the most important thing, it becomes known as realism. It becomes known as realism. But it's not really real. I mean, linear perspective is created by one stationary eye. We have 2 moving eyes, 2 moving watery eyes. So part of our experience as human beings is immersive. It's not all necessarily that the objective world is out there. But once we call it realism, that had a catalytic effect. And I would say it is what Whitehead called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. It's an abstraction that's treated as reality. So it basically, dualistic thinking is reified. It's made into reality. That's what people seem to think. But this becomes the basis for a scientific worldview of objective distance, which has really only recently, in the last 75 years, begun to be softened. At CIIS, I know there are classes in qualitative research and participatory. You can use participatory action research. You can insert yourself into things. But for a very long time, people didn't do that. Even some of the great anthropologists like Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead, when they were studying native peoples, they originally would stand apart. They would be viewing them from a distance. Bateson and Mead once made a film and they showed it to a tribe, and the tribe said, well, that's a very interesting film, but why are you filming all these unimportant things? So it's like they did the best they could, but what they were doing was they were so distant from the tribe that they really didn't understand what was important to them. And so they changed. And Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead became giants in the field because they changed. So there's so many aspects to linear perspective that occur. Here I'm going to justifying or juxtaposing the original image I showed you of Florence with a 130-year-old later image, and it's hard to imagine it's even the same place. But this is Florence also, and it's just done with linear perspective. So you can see the mountains in the background, you can see the things in the foreground, etc. But linear perspective does a lot of things. One of the things that is a subtle effect, but very important to realize, is it changed our view of time. It changed our view of everything, really, but as far as time, for the ancient Greeks, for instance, and for the modern Maori, they think of the not the future being ahead of them, but the past, because the ancient Greeks felt that the past was ahead of them because the past had already manifested where they had eyes to see it. And so it's completely opposite. But with linear perspective, we start using words like the near future and the distant future. And they're not just words now. They're the way that we see the future as being ahead of us. So when we see the future as being ahead of us, what is a natural consequence of that is that we begin to want to predict and control it. And so this becomes the seed of modern science, and modern science is often misperceived. I mean, or some of the scientists that we think of as the early scientists were really truly natural philosophers, and they were very creative people, but and sometimes very spiritual people. Even Rene Descartes, who I think has been pilloried too much, was a very spiritual person. And by the way, I don't know if any of you know how Rene Descartes died. Anybody know? No. Well, he was in a cafe and he ordered a cup of tea, and the waitress asked him, "Would you like some milk with your tea, Mr. Descartes?" And he said, "No, I think not." Poof, he disappeared. That was it. That was it for Descartes. That was his quick demise. Anyway, Descartes was a spiritual man. But even before Descartes, let's talk of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, in his time, everything shifts. Because when Da Vinci is a young man, he thinks of the energy of nature as emanating toward the human, and the human had a passive eye. See, Da Vinci straddles the advent of linear perspective. By the end of Da Vinci's lifetime, as we know, he's very much utilizing linear perspective to draw very complex scientific sketches. But by then, we've shifted to that the human eye is now the originator of energy. And the human eye is imbuing energy onto the landscape. So in effect, what we're doing is we're actually usurping time for humanity. And we only deign to give nature animism when we want to. And we only deign to give the rest of nature consciousness when we want to. Where obviously an indigenous view would be more that consciousness is the ground of being, which is also now becoming a very popular view in Western science, because Western science is coming full circle. And so that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. I want to discuss one other thing that will perhaps interest students there. When I was a student at California Institute of Integral Studies in 1983, one of my fellow students was a man from India, and his name was Praveen Agarwal. And he was born in India, raised in India, but he came to California Institute of Integral Studies, and he was learning about India. He was learning about his own culture. He was recapturing his own culture. We were taking a wonderful course in the very first semester in Vedanta from Dr. Reddy, who Debashish knows, who was someone that Debashish has studied with. And Praveen asked me the most interesting question one day. He just asked me, what is it about the West that gave them the impetus to colonize the world? What is it about the West that gave the impetus to colonize the world? And I had no reply. But it was one of those really provocative, evocative questions that I started to think about often over the next decade, 20 years and more. And this is what I think has occurred, at least in part. I'm not trying to say this is the whole thing, but I think this worldview of linear time has a lot to do with it. A lot to do with it, because once we see time as a line, it was just another step, but the West started to imagine that we were at the head of the parade, that we're at the head of the parade. So, and also the other thing about it is that local knowledge, which is based on cycles, it's based on the cycles of the ecosystemic changes in a given area, you know, which all people who live in the same location for a long enough time become very familiar with. You don't have to be an indigenous person or Native American or indigenous person to feel like this. You could, like David Pete, who used to teach at CIS, lived in Parry, Italy, in a little village where they've been doing the same thing for centuries and centuries, and they really knew the local ecology well too. Local ecology was displaced by abstract knowledge. And I think that's the seed of colonization, is abstract knowledge is taken from one place to another place. And it's the most compassionate view I can have of Western colonizers, is that they really thought that they were ahead somehow. And so they thought that they were bringing progress, or they were bringing the greatest religion, you know, or they were bringing something that they thought was an advancement. And just to give you an example about how silly this can be, let's say here in New Mexico, a child is taking a test and they're asked the question, what is a subway? If they answer a sandwich, they are marked wrong. Now, why is that? It's because somebody, someplace in academia has decided that the primary meaning of subway is an underground train. But if a child is living in New Mexico, they've seen countless numbers of subway sandwich stops, and they've never seen an underground train. So for them, their answer is really, truly correct. But that's just an example. Then the last thing I want to say about linear perspective is what Jean Gebser said about it, and I think it's one of the most powerful statements that could ever be said. It's that what we call progress is really distance from the origin. What we call progress is really distance from the origin. So that really begins to affect, you know, a lot. It underpins a lot of what has occurred, having to do with colonization, having to do with racism, having to do with social injustices. There's an imagined superiority if you think if you're more advanced than somebody else. I personally am repelled by those kinds of philosophies that posit even I don't think it's advisable to try to compare spiritual growth or something like that. It just rubs me the wrong way, honestly, because we're all here for a purpose. We're all contributing. We're all part of the whole. Every person, every critter, everybody, you know. So but once we imagine that we're superior over other humans, we also come to imagine we're superior over nature, and we begin to imagine we're separate and transcendent from nature. And then that affects everything. We have this dualization. Nature is out there someplace, And that affects the way that we think of medicine, germ theory, allopathic medicine. It affects the way we think of language. It affects the way we think of language because Indo-European languages, and when I'm teaching the class for CIS and original thinking, land, language, and consciousness, we're going to delve into this a lot more. But the English language and all the Indo-European languages are very much subject-object division, and they're also noun heavy. They're very noun heavy. And this also is possibly a remnant from a linear perspective because everything is wrapped up together. Science, art, consciousness, culture, music, it's all wrapped up together. And it's, if we think that we are different than other people, they become the enemy, you know, that's it. But if we also look at the microbial world as the enemy, we're really making a huge mistake because 95% of our DNA is microbes, 3% of our body weight, and over 50% of our cells. So, I mean, we are a garden. We are a symbiosis. We are a making with of all of creation. And we have to realize that. I think my number one concern in the world is soil erosion because of the living nature of Mother Earth. And when that gets weakened, everything gets weakened. Obviously, we have problems with animal and fish habitats being compromised, and that also creates the reason for some virulent viruses that were neutral in animal populations becoming very harmful to humans. But that's it. I wanted another, underlying all of this is what David Bohm spoke about as the problem, the underlying problem of everything has to do with our thinking. So if we have fragmented thinking, we're going to create a fragmented society. And Bohm liked to use the picture of a watch, or the metaphor of a watch. A smashed watch is very different than a watch that's carefully disassembled that could be put back together. The geodesic dome that Bucky Fuller created for the '67 Montreal Expo, which this is a picture of, and I actually happen to be there, was a pretty powerful image of a contextual whole. And that is really a little how the natural world is, which is a sacred hoop, and everything is supporting everything else. So Bucky did a very good job with that. I want to show one more slide, and then we're going to click off slides. Look at this image for a second before we completely abandon the subject of perspective. What do you see when you look at this image? This is a New Mexico painter, a native woman, Pablita Velarde, who only died about 10 years ago in her 90s, and she didn't even die of old age. She died in a car accident, so she might still be alive today. But Pablita does this beautiful painting called Old Father Storyteller. And notice a few things here, but the most obvious thing to notice is that she incorporates linear perspective in the village just perfectly. But she also abandons linear perspective completely when she wants to emphasize the storyteller. This is actually how I would like the world to be. Let's be creative. You can see it both ways. We can see both ways. We can have an immersive, immediate experience, and we can also have a scientific detached view. They can coexist. Okay, so we're going to stop screen sharing. Thank you. So I want to talk about what we can do about all of this. What we can do about all of this. Well, the first thing I would say is we can become aware of our thinking. We can become aware of our thought as a process too. So I've been blessed to be part of dialogue circles, and dialogue circles, as David Bohm understood, were an opportunity to get closer to what was very common and still is common in indigenous societies, a form of participatory consciousness, participatory knowing. And the difference between participatory thought and literal thought is literal thought, which you could say like a cat is a cat and that is that, you know. But participatory thought is kind of thought that brings things together, brings people together, brings ideas together, opens up to a new way of seeing. So that's part of the reclamation project. But how do we build this really? Well, a very simple thing is, being in nature, besides accepting the fact that of nature as a blessing, is participating in a way where you're giving offerings. I find that powerful. I don't pray without making an offering. It feels like a one-to-one relationship. It just doesn't feel right to not make an offering. Another way of that I think is very important is in building relationships, is to reconceive of how we think of time. Reconceive of how we think of time. Now, Toba Sanakwa Kanu, one of the elders who was at the Language of Spirit dialogues, we were talking about time once, and he posed this question. He said, what kinds of things want to happen together? What kinds of things want to happen together? And I think that's a really, really important question. I mean, you can go down to the river and you can see the cottonwood trees growing there and the osha or bare root growing alongside of it. Native people for years grew the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. They not only grow well together, they taste well together, which is why some of the best cuisine is always from a local place, because it's from a local terrain, and things that grow together there taste well together. It makes a lot of sense. So thinking of things as how they want to go together, that's a game changer for me. So imagine this. Now everybody close their eyes for a moment. And imagine you're looking at the stars, a little like the grandfather storyteller, and you're in a place where there's complete darkness, and you can see the Milky Way, which is known as the Trail of Ancestors. Thank you. Now, if you're looking at starlight, in Western science, we would say that we're looking at light from the distant past, right? Well, maybe, and maybe that's why so many people have considered the stars as ancestors, because it is something from the past, but it's also something that's right here, right now. The stars create light right there. You can go outside, and there's light from those stars right now. It's not just from the past, it's now. So it's a kind of what Tartang Tolku would probably call big time. It's a big concept of time. But more than that, looking up at the stars, like so many cultures have done, I think it's important to see those original stories as relationships. So for the Navajo, what we see as the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, and Polaris, they're in a relationship. I've been blessed to do some ceremony with the Canyoncito Band of Navajo in a remote area of New Mexico where you could see the stars and watch them all night and see the circles. And it's a beautiful thing to do, of course. And what they're looking at, they look at Nahokos Bika as the male revolving one, which is part of the Big Dipper and part Cassiopeia. Nahokos Biad is a female revolving one. And both of those are revolving around the North Star, Polaris, which is considered the central fire. So they're a family. Well, I rather like that. And that's actually at the root of a Navajo concept of ke, a kinship system of family, clan, tribe, and community, which is not just a system, it's also a way of being. It's and it's about kindness and compassion. Ke also means kindness and compassion. So it's so beautiful, so beautiful. This is, I feel, the real meaning of respect. Respect, kinship, and love is how I want to end, because, you know, most Native people that I've met don't use the word, and actually my Japanese wife, Tomoko, doesn't, in Japan, they also don't use words I love you much. You know, that was too direct. In fact, there wasn't even a word for thank you in Japan until the Portuguese came in with obrigado, which became arigato. But they didn't really even need that because they had other ways of expressing. But Tomoko, as you know, there are words to say "I love you" in Japanese and in Navajo, for instance, but they're very indirect. They're very indirect. It's much more that love is about respect, respect, and allowing the others to be, and to be in relationship. And I say allowing the other to be, and I'm troubled by the word other, because I'm reminded by what Ramana Maharshi said when he was asked, how should we treat others? And he replied, there are no others. So, and I agree with him, because we're all in relationship. But you know, the word respect, it comes from the, like, spectacles. Respect just means to look again. So respect is really about being interested in someone else's story, being interested in their story. So for Aboriginal people, you know, the lore, the story, the Nigarampa, all of that is really, really important. And they believe that every critter has a story. Even rocks have a story. In fact, rocks have a fantastic story to tell. Like, they create the Rocky Mountains. I mean, they have a big, huge story to tell. And that's part of the reason why a lot of people understand that rocks carry a certain kind of wisdom. And in any case, the most beautiful thing I can say is quoting someone else, but Paul Callahan spoke about, he's an Aboriginal man from the Warimi people. And he spoke about, in the Aboriginal way of thinking, we are conceived in love, born in love, surrounded by love, and eventually we return to the spirit world, which is a place of love. And that's what I call respect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I'd like to invite, not the usual, I'm not a big fan of so-called Q&A, questions and answers. I'd like to hear from other people. I'm interested in your story. That's what I just said. So I've been talking. So I want to hear how, perhaps what I said or what has stimulated you, and how does that relate to your story and what you're going through now? I turn it
Thanks,
back
Glenn.
over, and Jonathan, you handle it. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, I'll definitely I can help moderate questions. So don't be shy. I guess since the mic is unmuted, I could jump in and start us off, because it just seems like at the very end of your talk, it was tying some ideas together for me that were very helpful, and I just wanted to kind of share those and kind of just to respond in a way, not in, like you said,
Yes.
not in a question answer way, but just kind of share some thoughts. But that
Yes.
phrase, what kind of things happen together, what kind of things can happen together, right?
Want to happen together.
Want to happen together, right. That's a beautiful way to think about it, and it seems to kind of displace the I, like what kind of things do I want to happen together, right? And in terms of what you were speaking about, in terms of like time and the Western perspective of the future, of desiring to control the future, the openness of the, you know, the undetermination of a future, and that kind of desire to control it, it seems to kind of displace that a little bit. And in my work, I'm trying to understand and grapple with something along the lines of what is creative agency in a way, or how can we think about creativity? And as a musician, that's always been an interesting question. But at the very end, what I started hearing was that rather than kind of desire to make a future, which can easily lead you to resent the way things are, you are actually going to be respecting rather than resenting the past, which may be seen as in front of you, which was a really interesting image to think about as well. And so in terms of that perspective, that way of approaching something like, what does it mean to create a future or to be a participant in a future? It seems as though then the practice would be to, the desire would be to respect, and that can actually be a creative power, respect itself. And that's just something that I feel is a really helpful way of thinking about the past. And as a musician that was brought up in the jazz world, you know, dominated by music that I think is really quite overdetermined by the hero's journey, that you are the individual that's the genius, or you are creating a whole new thing, that like original creation, in a sense. Like you're talking about what's an original thought, well, what's an original musical expression? And so I think that that's what you've helped me with, is really to try to understand maybe a nature. I'm trying to bring in that nature of desire, and rather than controlling the future, actually respecting the past as a way of being creative in the future.
Very interesting. Very much a collaborative art, jazz. Anyone else want to?
Anybody else?
Well, yeah, Glenn, it's as always, you know, we spent many hours together, and you know, the sort of depth and reflective scope of your envisioning is always sort of very contemplative. It puts you into frames of large thinking in a broader sense. So I was, you know, following you and actually thinking about those two models that you presented, the model of, you know, the sort of perspectival view where things are taking a certain kind of a temporal, you know, progress, a scheme of progress, right? And then the other one where you are with all others at the same time. We're all together at the same time. and the immersive view, as you called it. And you said at one time, very interestingly, that you can actually experience these two together. And that was very profound, because in a sense, we tend to look at the world in compartments, that either we can be like this, and then something came along and split us off from that. And then we started seeing things in that progressive way. But as in your painting, the painting that you showed, which was a beautiful painting, how you can integrate the two and make one story out of them. They coexist. There's a way by which the progress becomes also part of our here and now. And our here and now becomes part of the journey of the human, right? And I thought reflecting on that was very, inviting. If you'd like to say anything more about that, Glenn.
Well, I don't own that painting, but that's Pablito Velarde's. It's on a cover of a book, old Father Storyteller. But I think it's very important. Thank you, Debashish. I mean, I so enjoy your spirit just listening to you, because you engage with ideas in a creative way, and you're suggesting that I'm glad that you were stimulated by this idea of being able to hold linear perspective and an immersive view at the same time, because these things are very possible. I'm sure a lot of you, we all get these things you see on the internet, and it says, you're going to see a rabbit or you're going to see this, and it's really not that hard to see them both at the same time, right? I bet all the CIS people can do it, but that is good. I mean, I do feel that what comes to mind, Debashish, about holding both things together, something you would probably know. I think it's the Isha Upanishad, where there's two birds that are sitting on the same bow. And one of them is just chirp, 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 chirp. And the other one is completely silent and motionless. And that's another example of both the coexistence of kind of a linear progression and an infinity. The infinite lives within the finite. And it wasn't part of tonight's talk, but I'm sure that in the class that we're teaching about original thinking, we'll be reading Gebser, because Gebser, I really admire Gebser, but he also was on very much the same track as Sri Aurobindo, in that both of them were not positing teleological advance that makes previous structures of consciousness obsolete or something. So this is really important, because I feel that as Emerson said, all our progress is an unfolding. You first have a vegetable, like the vegetable plant. You first have an instinct, then an opinion, then a knowledge. As the plant has root, bud, and fruit, trust the instinct to the end, though you can render no reason, it shall sooner, it's vain to hurry it, it shall, by trusting it to the end, it shall ripen into truth, and you shall know why you believe. So this tracks along with what Gebser was saying about, and what Aurobindo are saying about spirit infusing itself into matter and then re-emerging in the inverse order in which it originally unfolded. So there is a certain form of forward motion. There's this form of progress, but it's not what it appears to be. It's not what it appears to be. And it cannot be attempted with just your brain. Now, it has to come through your heart. it's like Mother Earth has to bubble it up through you, and it has to come from your gut, heart, and then maybe later your head. And that's more than I wanted to say about that. Sorry, Debashish, but you're stimulating.
Thanks. Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? How is
I think
the
Stefan
ideas of the evening
has
affecting your life?
I think Stefan is saying something. You're muted.
Muted.
He seems to be muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the talk. I don't normally either ask questions or comment because it takes a long time for an image to come up for me, and that's really what kind of gets me moving. But there was something that really struck me in just a comment that you made about original thinking as being thinking from the origin, from the original place. And I have to say that it's not something that I had ever really considered before. You know, when I received the title of your class and the book, I did think of it more in terms of creative thinking rather than thinking from the origin. And it struck me as this was kind of just like working its way into me, that I thought of a comment that that Jung makes in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where he had spent some time in the Southwest with a Pueblo elder named Mountain Lake, who just said he doesn't understand white people. He said they're always seeking for something. What is it? They're restless. What is it that they're seeking? And it struck me when that thought came to me that when I seek, you know, if I look for original thinking, if I look for my original thinking, I get further and further away from it. Sort of like dreaming that I step out of a house, I'm headed for somewhere. And the moment I step out, I make a left-hand turn and suddenly I'm lost because I'm seeking rather than being, because the original thought is actually in the being. It's what I am. I can't get behind it. And this image that you gave of the flipping the future and the past and seeing as the past is coming towards you because you're seeing it before you, because that's what you can see, whereas the future is something that you can't see yet, really struck me. So I'm not going anyplace with this, but it just really hit me for a moment how my gesture is always to seek, always to look, rather than to be and to speak from that place, from that place of origin.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, and Carl Jung was visiting Taos Pueblo in 1924. Yeah, so I'm delighted that it happened in New Mexico. Thank you for that. Just a brief response is that I did emphasize original thinking as thinking from the origin, but it can be very creative. The origin is very creative. And infinitely creative. And so, in a sense, it can fulfill the other meaning definition of being creative or new.
I suppose
but it's a renewal, really. So that's really great. And one other thought is that one of the most interesting things I ever said to me was by a woman named Polly Walker, who is a Cherokee woman, but has been living in Australia for many years. And she spoke about rather than seeking knowledge, that the knowledge is seeking her. So it's kind of interesting twist, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I like it. Yeah.
I can imagine just one further thing, that speaking from the origin, thinking from the origin is going to be original because it's unique. It's unique to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a paradox. I mean, this is not something solvable, but you could say that there's nothing is original, or that or everything is original. I mean, we're all vibrating at a certain frequency, so we're a unique expression of something, and that's what makes the world so interesting, and even a group of 10 so interesting. So thank you. Anyone else? I'd love to hear from
Yeah.
everyone if they have something to say. Share.
Lucia?
Hi. Hi, Jonathan. Thank
Hi.
you. Thank you. Thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting. I'm one of these weird people that came from medical school. So for me, everything of this is very interesting and new. And when I hear you talking, I'm not going to put in the original thinking phrase, but you're talking of space, non-space, not time, not linear time, not progression, expansion. But for me, everything that you're describing is kind of the dream state, is biological and is creative, is neuroplasticity, and it is expansion of consciousness. You interact the body and the emotions, because you have vivid dreams. It's kind of, you can connect different times, different people, different thoughts. So it's kind of, I don't know if the dream state is the incubation of this state that we're calling at this point original thinking, where we can navigate and expand in a way that is not linear, but that at the same time we can connect with linear time in our waking lives, to be able to navigate not in a linear but in a circular way, because we're expanding as human, in mind, in heart, in spirit. So we can see the process as not a progression but as an expansion that comes from interacting from the dream world, from the consciousness, but also bringing that and having that little piece, or I don't know, transversing the Maya and having kind of the painting here, even though the expansion it's complete. I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's what it came to my
You're
mind.
making beautiful sense. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, at CIIS, my master's thesis was called Sleep, Dreams, and Death. So I have always had a strong interest in dreams. And the way you're framing dreams might be similar to David Bohm's Implicate Order, or something from the greater, the greater knowing that comes through us. And I love the way you phrased it. It was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll jump in if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you for the interesting. I got a bunch of things that lit up as you were talking. So I'm just going to kind of rapid fire, and then at the end, if you want to come back and comment on any of it. One, I was wondering if you're anywhere near Philmont, near the Scout Camp, High Adventure Camp in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northern New Mexico, because I did a field day down there. Another is, I'm wondering if you're a fan of Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, because I believe that if your only prayer is thank you, is one of his thoughts. You said a little bit about wanting to hear our story. As many here know, I am somewhat obsessed with the concept of synchronicity. And so I'd like to share maybe one or two. You mentioned the hummingbird, and that brought to mind, I'm here in Central Ohio. Been here in our current home since about 2015. One of my favorite spots is sitting out on the front porch on the swing. And I think it was just last year, maybe year before, noticed a hummingbird flew up, hovered about 6 to 10 feet away, and ducked off. Second day, not too long after the first, it happened. And I was like, oh, okay. And, you know, you said something about the hummingbirds being an interesting messenger. Was sitting out a day or two after that with the wife on the porch. And I thought, you know, did I tell you about this hummingbird that has popped up last couple of days? And as soon as I had days out of my mouth, looked up and it just lit on a branch of our tree right out front. And we both were just sitting there like, whoa. And then it was gone. You mentioned and Jonathan picked up on this too, I believe you said it was an indigenous fellow who said, who mentioned about how things want to happen together.
Yes.
And that reminded me of, I don't know if you've run across Jung's foreword to the I Ching, where he mentions how in the system of the I Ching, their view is not like the Western causality piece where A causes B causes C, but they notice more holistically how things tend to happen together or want to happen together, which aligns with his concept of synchronicity and you know, inner and outer happening together. And it occurs to me then that in that tendency we have, if it was an indigenous fellow that mentioned it to you, that we got an indigenous, a Western, and an Eastern thought all aligning on that same point, which seems to me to be fascinating. And I think that was the gist of what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning my favorite city, synchronicity. Thank you. Thank you. It was Topasanequit Canoe, the Anishinaabe elder, who asked what kinds of things want to happen together. And he asked this at the Seed Language of Spirit Dialogue Circle, so in front of many people. It was a brilliant question. Thank you. I feel like, yeah, I appreciate that you're saying also an indigenous person, a Western person, and an Eastern person could come to the same place. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no, yeah, there's no, spirits can speak to all of us. You know, yes, Art.
I did
Go
want to
ahead.
add on one thing that Stefan reminded me of. In that tale of Jung talking to the Pueblo chief, the chief says, you know, white folks are running around, and they're always looking for something. The follow-on comment of that was that the chief said, you know, we don't know what they're looking for. We think they're mad, right? And so Jung says, you know, why do you think all white folks are mad? And the chief says, because they say they think with their head. And Jung is surprised. He's like, well, of course we think with our head. What do you think with? He says the chief pointed to his heart,
Yeah.
right? Which goes back to, you know, if you, I think you started out, if, you know, if you say, you know, what do you think of when you think of original thinking? You know, I think we all start, you know, in the West, you know, but suppose we started with that question in the heart. What would that do to the question, I wonder?
That's terrific. That's terrific, Art. And still today, if you go to see an acupuncturist, they say you're thinking too much. They're concerned about your heart, not your head. Because in the Chinese medicine, you think with your heart, and I think we also think with our gut. You know, there's a Heart Math Institute, and that's a wonderful thing. You know, and they've done some good work. But we also think with our gut. It's a hugely important thing, and we've reduced it to, you know, only feelings, gut feelings, you know, but it's actually thought emerges in that way. It's something that really can guide us, and yeah, I think it's enormously important. We are not of the brain, but the brain can be have a wonderful service, but it has to be in service to the heart and to the community of all of us, and including all the critters, all our relations. Then it's a very good thing. Yeah. Thank you for that, Art. Beautiful. Anyone else?
I'll just say something here real quick. I don't know how much time we have, but I really appreciated you saying, what if the universe was just here? I've thought that many times. It would completely change everything if we started from it's here versus a beginning, a middle, or an end. So thank you for that. Very cool. And I also really appreciated the way you said that originally thoughts were prayers. I'm not sure what it did to me, but it's done something to me to, it's almost a relief. There's a sense of relief there, like, oh, wow, like, of course. And I can do that too. I really appreciate that. So thanks. I look forward to learning from you in September.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Beautiful thoughts. Thank you, Dana.
Does anybody else want to come into the conversation who haven't spoken yet? If not, then yeah, Glenn, did you want to?
There's no. If this were a dialogue circle, and when I teach the class, I am going to put to students, when we know their names, and if they get their photo, we'll put them in it doesn't even sound right, Excel spreadsheet, but you can put an Excel spreadsheet in a circle. So, gosh, it makes so much difference. This is, you know, I want somebody to create a software where we could all be in a circle now, you know, because it makes a big difference. The circle mimics nature, it's whole. Also, when we have a dialogue, we have an opening in that circle so that we allow spirit to move in. But yeah, no, the beautiful thing about a circle is that everybody contributes to the whole, and you're contributing in your presence. You're contributing in your presence, and it's always the principle of dialogue that you can pass. You know, there's no pressure to say anything, because listening is more important than speaking. And I know that's hard to duplicate in a written online dialogue, but I'm going to do my best to try to be sensitive to understand who's really listening before they just make a comment. I think it's really important, really important. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not, Jonathan, I don't know where you go from here if you want. What is your normal process?
Well, if we were all in a circle at my home, then we'd just play music for the rest of the night. But but I think that maybe if there's any closing remarks, Stefan or Debashish, we can close the circle for now and then continue our contemplation on these themes and return to the origin in whatever way that looks like.
You know, since Glenn invoked Raman Maharshi, you know, there's the famous story about Somerset Maugham, who went to visit Raman Maharshi when before he wrote his book, The Razor's Edge. And he wanted to meet him, but, you know, he was told that he had to go the next day and meet him over there when he gave his public sitting. So he said, okay, he was waiting in his room, and Raman Maharshi, it was evening, and Raman Maharshi just walked by and just entered his room. And so he was so thrilled and surprised, and he bubbled up with many things to say and many questions and all that. And then Raman Maharshi just lifted his finger and said, silence is the best conversation. So maybe that's the closing thing to say. Our togetherness in silence is perhaps the best conversation at this point.
Then I'd like to invite Debashish's comment to be a closing prayer. But we are here together in silence, in communion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.